1,769. You could do the same procedure with the other number, or just divide 77 by 11 to get 7, its other prime factor. So, to recap, if you want to find the prime factors p and q of a number n, first, make a bad guess, g. Second, find out how many times r you have to multiply g by itself to reach one more than a multiple of n. Third, use that exponent to calculate two new numbers that probably do share factors with n. And finally, use Euclid's algorithm to find the shared factors between those numbers and n, which should give you p and q. Now, you don't need a quantum computer to run any of these steps, but on a classical computer, this method wouldn't be any faster than other methods. The key process that a quantum computer speeds up is step 2, finding the exponent you raise g to equal one more than a multiple of n. To see why, let's go back to our example where 8 to the power of 10 is one more than a multiple of 77. Watch what happens to the remainders if we keep going past 8 to the power of 10, to 8 to the 11, 8 to the 12, and so on. Well, we get remainders of 8, 64, 50, 15, 43, 36, 57, 71, 29, and again, 1. The remainders cycle, and they will just keep cycling. Notice how the exponent that yields a remainder of 1 is 20, which is 10 more than the first exponent that yielded a remainder of 1. So we know that 8 to the 30 and 8 to the 40, 8 raised to any power divisible by 10, will also be one more than a multiple of 77. It's also worth noting that if you pick any remainder, say 15, the next time you find that same remainder, the exponent will have increased by 10. So you can find the exponent r that gets us to one more than a multiple of n by looking at the spacing of any remainder, not just one. Remember that. Here I'm plotting out the remainders on a log scale so you can see they are periodic with a period of 10. If I had made a different guess, say I had picked g equals 15 instead of 8, well then the period would be different, and the remainders would be different, but there would always be a remainder of 1. Why is this? Well, now that you can see this is a repeating pattern, we can go back to the beginning. And any number raised to the power of 0 is 1. So that is actually the first remainder, so it must also appear when the cycle starts again. Now we are ready to use a quantum computer to factor any large product of two primes. First, we split up the qubits into two sets. The first set we prepare in a superposition of 0 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9, all the way up to 10 to the power of 1,234. Yeah, this is a huge superposition. But if we had perfect qubits, it would require only around 4,100. The other set contains a similar number of qubits, all left in the 0 state for now. Now we make our guess g, which most likely doesn't share factors with n. We raise g to the power of the first set of qubits, and then we divide by n and store the remainder in the second set of qubits, leaving the first set of qubits as it was. Now we have a superposition of all the numbers we started with, and the remainder of raising g to the power of those numbers divided by n. And through this operation, we have entangled our two sets of qubits. But we can't just measure this superposition. If we did, we would get a random value and learn nothing. But there is a trick we can use. If we don't measure the entire superposition, but only the remainder part, we will obtain some random remainder. But this remainder won't occur just once. It will occur multiple times, every time it comes up in the cycle. Imagine we were doing this with the example from before, with n equals 77 and g equals 8. If the remainder we measured was, say, 15, then there would be multiple terms in our superposition, because there are multiple exponents you can raise g to that give this same remainder. Exponents 4, 14, 24, 34, and so on. They are each separated by 10. And that value is the exponent that satisfies our equation. So, more generally, after measuring the remainder, we will be left with a superposition of states that all share the same remainder. and the exponents will all be separated by the same amount r. This is the number we are looking for. Since the remainder is now the same for all states, we can put it to the side, and we now have a superposition that is periodic. Each term is separated from its neighbors by an amount r. If we now apply the quantum Fourier transform to this superposition of states, I'm simplifying a little here, we will be left with states containing 1 over r. So all that's left to do now is perform a measurement and find r by inverting it. And that's it for the quantum part. Now, as long as r turns out to be even, we can use r to turn our bad guess g into two numbers that likely share factors with n. And as long as these terms themselves are not a multiple of n, we can use Euclid's algorithm to find the factors of n and break the encryption. This would only take several thousand perfect qubits, but the qubits we have today are imperfect, so we need additional qubits to act as redundant information. In 2012, it was estimated that it would take 1 billion physical qubits to break RSA encryption. But by 5 years later, that number had dropped to 230 million. And in 2019, after more technological breakthroughs, that estimate plummeted to just 20 million physical qubits. So how many qubits do we have today? Well, if we look at the state of IBM's quantum computers, we are nowhere near that number of qubits. But progress looks to be exponential. So now it's just a question of when these two curves will collide before all our existing public key encryption can be broken. Because we've long known this threat is coming, scientists have been looking for new ways to encrypt data which can withstand attacks from both normal and quantum computers. In 2016, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, launched a competition to find new encryption algorithms that aren't vulnerable to quantum computers. Cryptographers from all over the world submitted 82 different proposals, which were rigorously tested. Some were broken, and then on July 5th, 2022, NIST selected 4 of the algorithms to be part of their post-quantum cryptographic standard. So how do they work? Well, 3 of the algorithms are based on the mathematics of lattices. So let's do a simple example in the 2D plane. Take 2 vectors, r1 and r2. By adding together different integer combinations of these vectors, say 3 times r1 and 1 times r2, you can get to different points. And all the points you can get to by combining these 2 vectors in different ways is what is called a lattice. Now, I will also give you the point C, and your task is to tell me which combination of R1 and R2 will bring me to the lattice point closest to C. It's pretty easy to see that we can get there by going in the direction of R2 twice, and in the negative direction of R1 twice. Simple enough. But those vectors R1 and R2 are not the only vectors that can give you this lattice. Take B1 and B2, for example. These vectors also build up the same lattice. And now, if I ask you the same question again, can you tell me the combination of B1 and B2 that gets you to the lattice point closest to C? This has become a lot harder. But why is that? Each time we're taking a step, we're trying to get closer in either the X or Y direction. But with the B vectors, each time we take a step in the right direction with one vector, it puts us off in the other direction. And that's why these vectors are a lot harder to work with. In the end, it takes us a combination of 8 times B1 and negative 6 times B2 to get to the closest lattice point. That is a lot harder than before, but it's still a relatively easy problem to solve. But if we extend it to 3 dimensions, this already becomes a lot harder. Especially because you're not given the collection of all lattice points. You're only given the vectors that make it up. So when you find a lattice point close to the target, you must still find all the other lattice points near it to make sure yours is indeed the closest. Let's take a circle of radius r in 2 dimensions. The number of lattice points inside the circle is proportional to r squared. Add a 3rd dimension, and the number of points in a sphere is proportional to r cubed. So just watch how the number of lattice points grows as we increase the number of dimensions. Solving the closest vector problem is a piece of cake for your computer in 3 dimensions. Even 100 dimensions should be manageable. But in proposed future encryption schemes, we'll use around 1,000 dimensions. Take one step in the right direction on one of those dimensions, and you could potentially be taking a wrong step in the other 999 dimensions. You win some, you lose everything else. With that many dimensions, it becomes extremely hard to find the closest point, even for the most powerful computers. That is, unless you know a good set of vectors. So how do we use that to encrypt data? Well, let's go back to our two-dimensional example. Each person has a good set of vectors that describes a lattice, but they keep these vectors secret, and they only share their lattice publicly using a set of vectors that is hard to work with. Now, if I want to send someone a message, I pick a point on their lattice. For example, say this point corresponds to the number 7. So if I want to send the number 7, I can take that point, but then add some random noise to it. So the message I send is not precisely at that point, but close to it. Now, to decode the message, my recipient must figure out which lattice point is closest to the message point. In 1,000 dimensions, this will be extremely hard to do unless you have the nice set of vectors, which my recipient does. So it's easy for the recipient, who has the good vectors, but hard for everyone else. And as far as we know, this problem is extremely difficult to solve for both normal and quantum computers. Behind the scenes, there's an army of researchers, mathematicians, and cryptographers working to make sure your secret data stays secret. These are some of the unsung heroes that will keep us safe moving forward, avoiding mass surveillance by governments, keeping critical infrastructure protected, and allowing you to live as if quantum computers were never invented in the first place. Something that fascinates me is being able to see where the world is headed. And right now, it's clear that quantum computers and AI chatbots are going to play bigger and bigger roles in our lives in the coming decades. Even if we don't know exactly how they'll be implemented, I think it's important to learn how they work right now. And you can do that with this video's sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant has an incredible course on quantum algorithms. This one was co-developed with Microsoft and Alphabet X. I love that you can simulate quantum gates and write and execute real quantum algorithms right in the lesson. No need to set up your own development environment. And if you want to dive deeper into cryptography, making and breaking codes is really a matter of statistics. Strong statistical reasoning skills help us find patterns in data and make sense of them, which is crucial to mastering just about any topic in math and computer science. Brilliant's course on data analysis will help you ramp up fast. It uses everyday situations like business models to illustrate key concepts in statistics. And it's interactive, so you can get hands-on with data visualizations and develop a real intuition for interpreting them. You know, the thing that sets Brilliant apart is they know how to break fundamentals down into their core building blocks. Whether you're learning math, computer science, or data analysis, Brilliant's thousands of bite-sized interactive lessons help you master key concepts and build to more advanced topics. You can try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days. Just go to brilliant.org/Veritasium. I will put that link down in the description. And for viewers of this video, Brilliant is offering 20% off their annual premium subscription to the first 200 people to sign up. So I want to thank Brilliant for sponsoring this video, and I want to thank you for watching.
Seen The Matrix? Chances are that you have. It's a rather popular film. In one particular sequence, the protagonist, Neo, is presented with a conundrum. The red pill or the blue pill? A choice between learning the absolute truth behind reality and the blissful ignorance of illusion. Neo eventually decides to take the red pill and does indeed learn the truth, as horrifying as it may be. He learns that he's been living inside a simulation this whole time, and he's now finally experiencing true reality. At least, That is what you, the viewer, is led to believe, but an aspect that is somewhat dismissed is that the red pill doesn't grant you knowledge of reality as much as it completely eradicates any distinction between real and fake. Let me ask you this, when watching the movie, did you ever question if the supposed true reality that Morpheus and the gang exist within is actually true reality? What's to say that they are not inside a simulation themselves? I mean, up until this point, the Matrix was just as real as this newfound reality. If anything, the Matrix only proves that knowing what reality is and is not is an impossibility. And this could potentially go on for infinity, never reaching any sort of true, actual reality, if that even exists. Just a simulation within a simulation within a simulation within a simulation. Yeah, and so on, so on. This video is not really about the Matrix per se, but it's hopefully a digestible introduction to the profound and intricate topic of this video. The idea that the universe and reality itself could be a simulation is not something new. We can trace similar ideas as far back as the time of ancient Greece, when numerous philosophers around the world alluded to the idea that reality could be an illusion. Chinese philosopher Zhang Zhu compared his own existence to that of a dream in which he believed himself to be a butterfly. He questioned the distinction between reality and a dream, if both could seem equally real. Another example is Plato's allegory of the cave. The first part goes like this. Imagine a cave where people have been imprisoned since birth. They are chained in such a way that they are forced to constantly gaze upon the wall in front of them. They cannot look around the cave, at each other, nor at themselves. All they know is this wall and nothing else. Behind them there's a fire, and between the prisoners and the fire there's a walkway. When people walk between the fire and the prisoners, shadows are cast upon the wall. Because the prisoners doesn't know anything else, they believe the shadows to be real, actual entities of their own. And when a passerby is talking, the prisoners believe it to be coming from the shadows themselves. They have no idea that the shadows on the wall are merely lesser copies of reality, and falsely assume that this partial reality that they can perceive is the complete truth. There are many interpretations of this allegory which can be applied to a vast range of topics. It can be interpreted as a way of understanding the importance of knowledge and how it shapes reality, or it could be an analogy for human ignorance and our unwillingness to seek truth and wisdom. It could also be read like this. Just like the shadows in this cave, could our perceived reality be a shadow of something else? In physics and cosmology, there's now a subfield called digital physics, which is a collection of theoretical perspectives based on the premise that the universe is describable by information and as such is computable. And some of these physicists around the world are actually trying to find out if our universe could be a simulation, commonly referred to as the simulation hypothesis. This is done by, in various ways, comparing the real world against our own technology. If certain similarities are found, conclusions can be drawn. One such study, titled Constraints on the Universe as a Numerical Simulation, concludes that it is possible. A really simple analogy is to think of the pixels on your screen that make up this video right now. When I move this red dot across the screen, we perceive it as a smooth, sliding action. But we know for a fact that this is an illusion caused by the limitations of our sight. Nothing is really moving, it's just bits of information being modified in such a way that, from our perspective, it's perceived as motion. If we zoom in and slow down, we notice that the red dot isn't sliding as much as it snaps to each individual pixel. And this is essentially what they have observed, that the universe has a finite resolution, or an underlying lattice, as they call it. This could mean that the universe and reality is not made out of energy or matter, but is instead made out of quantized bits of information that, from our perspective, is perceived as energy and matter. Another way to imagine a computational universe is using what's known as a cellular automaton. A cellular automaton consists of a grid of cells. In this case, each cell can either be populated or unpopulated. We then need to specify a set of instructions so that the state of each cell evolves over time based on the state of neighboring cells. It may sound complicated, but it really isn't. Let's start with something simple. For example, we could say that each unpopulated cell will become populated if a populated neighbor is found to the left. We then populate a single cell and execute the program. What happens is that for each increment of time, a new cell is populated to the right of every populated cell. So in this case, it just continues to the right forever. Not very interesting. Let's make it a bit more complicated by using the instructions of a popular cellular automaton known as the game of life. These are the rules. Number 1, each populated cell with either one or no neighbors becomes unpopulated. Number 2, each populated cell with 4 or more neighbors also becomes unpopulated. Number 3, each populated cell with 2 or 3 neighbors remains populated. Number 4, each unpopulated cell with 3 populated neighbors becomes populated. We populate as many cells as we'd like and then press play. The resulting behavior is actually quite remarkable. I mean, it's not GTA 5 or anything, but still. What's remarkable is that these 4 simple instructions can over time produce incredible complexity. Cells can live, die, or multiply and create a sea of seemingly chaotic randomness. Some configurations stop immediately, while others seem to continue forever, and there is no guaranteed way of telling if any specific configuration is eventually going to stop or continue indefinitely. If we zoom out as the model continues to expand, increasingly complex patterns begins to emerge. But not only patterns, over time even the behavior changes. The interactions between individual cells is overshadowed by the behavior between entire blocks of cells. And this is the idea, that the universe began as something incredibly simplistic, like a grid of cells governed by a few simple instructions. But given enough time, it evolved into something incredibly complex. It's only natural for us to assume that the complexity of the universe must be very complicated. The world can often seem very confusing, random, unpredictable, and even unexplainable. What the game of life quite elegantly illustrates is that complexity can actually be the result of simplicity. If you and I and everything around us is the result of computable information, it stands to reason that that information can be modified and manipulated to an endless extent. We would be nothing more than puppets in a theater. Maybe the simulation began seconds ago and we only think it's been 13.9 billion years because that information was artificially included upon its creation. Maybe the universe is really, really tiny and all distant celestial bodies are simplistic renditions to create the illusion of enormity. Maybe nothing physically exists until we observe its existence. Perhaps detail and complexity is added when it's needed instead of being constant and absolute. Perhaps discovering that this is all a simulation is part of the simulation. Perhaps this isn't the first iteration of the universe and someone could be pressing the off switch right now. Don't get me wrong, all of what I just said is absolutely insane. But that's kind of my point. If we accept the simulation hypothesis, we also accept that literally anything is possible and that nothing can be determined. Imagine that we somehow found a definitive proof. So for the sake of argument, let's say we escaped the simulation. Then I think we could all agree that we would know that it's a simulation, right? But we still wouldn't know if our escape from the simulation was simulated in and of itself. In other words, we could still be inside the simulation. It's a so-called infinite regress issue, which means that any evidence we find or knowledge that we obtain could just as well be simulated in and of itself. including any evidence that it's not a simulation. As the extent of the illusion cannot be determined, nothing can be determined. In the first draft of this script, I addressed many radical ideas surrounding the simulation hypothesis, but as it can all be nullified by asking what if it's part of the simulation, it's really not that interesting. There's little, if any, scientific value here. It's mostly philosophical and metaphysical, and it's all very analogous to the limited reality of the prisoners in the cave. So let's change our perspective. Instead of assuming the position of the prisoners in the cave, could we be the ones who ignite the fire to cast shadows upon the wall? A big reason why ideas related to simulating reality has become so popular in mainstream media, like movies and video games, is that on the surface it seems very plausible. If we look at what we could do just a few decades ago and compare it to modern technology, it's easy to imagine a future wherein technology has advanced far enough that it's indistinguishable from reality itself. And while there's nothing that explicitly prevents that from happening in the future, there are definitely limitations to what we can and cannot do. Over the past half-century, the processing power of computers has doubled every 2 years, which is an observation known as Moore's Law. But this growth won't continue forever. In fact, it's already begun to slow down. It's now closer to 2.5 or even 3 years. The reason for this decline is due to the physical limits of computation. Computers are fantastical and can do incredible things, but they are not magical. The speed at which they process information and the amount of information they can process is, like everything else, governed by the laws of physics. For example, we will never, regardless of any potential futuristic technology, be able to accurately replicate anything down to every single molecule, atom, and fundamental particle. And the strange world of quantum mechanics is to blame. There are many reasons why quantum mechanics makes this impossible, but one great example is the uncertainty principle. It states that the more precisely the position of a particle is determined, the less precisely the momentum of that particle can be determined, and vice versa. You can think of this as a balancing board. We force the left side down to increase precision in measuring the position of the particle, but in doing so, the right side has to go up, and thus we lose precision in measuring the momentum of the particle. To be certain about both properties at the same time would require us to break the board, or in this case, break the laws of physics. The uncertain and probabilistic nature of the universe makes exact replication an impossibility. So let's forget about any notion of exact replication. It just isn't, dare I say, realistic. What we can do instead is mimic reality by approximation. Take a look at this. This is the Illustris project, a giant cosmological simulation with the aim of studying the formation and evolution of galaxies. It's an ongoing project in which scientists use the most precise data and calculations currently available to create the most precise model of the universe possible. At its highest resolution, it had a volume of 106.5 cubic megaparsecs. It took several months to complete on a supercomputer with 8,192 cores, used 25 terabytes of RAM at its peak, and had a particle count of over 18 billion. Of course, it's only realistic to a certain extent and from a very narrow perspective. The simulation is detailed enough that they can actually zoom in on individual galaxies, but it's not detailed enough to simulate the birth of each individual star or planet, and certainly not the astronomical numbers of individual molecules and atoms and so on. Instead, they have to approximate how a galaxy behaves as a whole without actually simulating all of its individual parts and properties. And once the simulation arrived at present day, the result was strikingly similar to what we observe in the universe. And by constantly tweaking these approximations, increasingly realistic results can be achieved, never quite reaching true realism, but hopefully realistic enough. This is all well and good for our scientific endeavors, things like astrophysics, particle physics, meteorology, fluid mechanics, medicine, evolutionary biology, and the list goes on and on. But what about creating a simulation for entertainment purposes? So far, I've only talked about simulations as self-contained systems. You write some code, press execute, and hope for the best. But wouldn't it be far more interesting to create simulations that we can not only interact with, but also experience to the point of complete immersion? Software like video games are great examples of interactive simulations, and hardware like the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive are some of the most immersive technologies available to the public. Well, they will be soon at least. Of course, these are only aimed at stimulating the audio-visual senses. What about everything else, like touch, for example? Well, there's full-body suits like the Tesla suit, vests like the Core FX, and gloves like the Hands Omni. These will give the illusion of actually holding virtual objects, getting hit by bullets, and possibly even give the sensation of temperature. Then there's also entire systems built to create a virtual experience, usually designed according to a specific game or game type. There's driving and racing simulators, flight simulators, railway simulators, etc. If you want to navigate inside a virtual environment, your best option at the moment is something like the Virtuix Omni. All of these technologies are fantastic, but they are not ideal. They are only the beginning of the virtual reality revolution that likely waits ahead. They are the monochromatic TVs before color, because the limitations of these devices stems from their implementation. You're always going to be aware that you're wearing a head-mounted display or that you're strapped into a locomotion platform. What's eventually going to replace these mediating technologies to create a truly immersive experience are BCIs, brain-computer interfaces. Research on BCIs began in the 1970s, and since then the technology has come a long way. So far, the focus has mostly been on repairing cognitive and sensory motor functions. As an example, neuroprosthetics are prosthetic limbs that can be controlled by a person's brain. People who's lost an arm and hand can now get a robotic prosthesis that they can control using sensors implanted in their brain. BCIs can also be used to allow paraplegics to walk again and help people with many types of paralysis. From an entertainment perspective, you can truly see its potential when combined with virtual reality. The Emotive Epoch is a publicly available BCI that you can actually use to play games with your mind. I mean, it's not perfect, it's actually far from perfect, but come on. You just cannot complain when someone has quite literally invented mind control. And better yet, in 2014, the first brain-to-brain communication was achieved between two people via the internet. In other words, telepathy is now becoming a reality. But we're still missing a crucial aspect. That is CBI technology, a computer-brain interface. And this is a significantly more difficult obstacle to overcome. In a typical brain-to-computer interface, a device receives information from the brain and tries to interpret what that information means. The worst that could happen is that the computer gets it wrong. In a computer-to-brain interface, the brain receives information from a device, and the worst that could happen is that you actually damage the brain of the user. In 2002, a blind man had a device implanted onto the visual cortex of his brain, which was in turn connected to a camera. This allowed him to partially regain his vision. The camera sent its signals to the visual cortex of his brain, and his brain interpreted these signals as if they actually came from his eyes. Another example of a CBI was used on monkeys. A monkey would control a virtual arm to touch one of several visually identical objects. When the virtual arm touched one of the objects, a signal would be sent back to the brain of the monkey to stimulate the sensation of touch, describing the fine texture of an object that didn't actually exist. But there's definitely a greater risk at play here, and it's gonna take a while until we perfect such technology. But once we've unlocked the mysteries of the brain, the possibilities will be virtually endless. If this technology continues to advance and is able to entirely escape the realm of science fiction, the world as we know it and the future we often imagine will dramatically change. When we try to imagine the distant future, we often think of humanity as these grand explorers of the universe. It's often just assumed that we will continue to expand outwards far beyond the Earth and the solar system. Of course, this is under the optimistic assumption that no apocalyptic events takes place and that we steadily continue to progress and innovate. Almost every non-apocalyptic futuristic science fiction tale describes humanity as a species that will expand outwards. And maybe that's true. But when this technology turns into reality, why would you want to? A powerful virtual reality could allow us to do anything and everything. No fear of harm or death, no irreversible consequences for your actions, no physical limitations. The ability to customize and manipulate the world around us to fit our personal needs and preferences. Just like in a dream, maybe it's possible to manipulate the brain's sense of time. Real-world minutes could turn into virtual years. Could that be why the universe can seem so lifeless, even though it's been around for such a long time? Perhaps every civilization that reaches a certain technological maturity realizes that expanding outwards to explore the universe is pointless when expanding inwards using technology allows you to do so much more. I've never made a video like this before, a video heavy on speculation and even touching on some philosophical questions. Hopefully you don't think I've gone completely insane. It's so difficult to make a video about these topics without sounding like you have some sort of religious faith in the Matrix waiting for Morpheus to come down from the heavens. It's far-fetched, highly speculative, and mostly just fun to think about.
$7800X3D reviews are out and it's launching in wowzers. Also the RTX 4070 and the 4090. No longer top piece of crap. Sorry, I had to admit it to you. Let's get into the hot news, everybody. I'm your Brett host. We're going to be going over the hottest tech news that you can find on the internet while you enjoy your breakfast this Thursday, April 6th. I was going to say May 6th, 2023. We're going to talk about all the hottest tech news. But before we do that, I need to let you know that we're actually live streaming right now our trip to Micro Center to actually pick up the 7800X3D. So come join us. We're giving away a PC, and if you watch the stream over on Twitch, you can enter into the giveaway. It's pretty easy peasy.
So that's important, but I'm going to pick up the chip that we got the reviews for, and it turns out that it's incredible. Despite the fact that AMD themselves only wants to say that it's slightly behind the 7950X3D in gaming, it turns out that that's just based on how they benchmark things, and from what I can gather from all of the reviews that I've seen, because the reviews did come out from a lot of different publications. We'll have a link in the video description for you to check out VideoCard's list of all of the people who got a 7800X3D to review, and from what I can gather, it is an incredible chip. And gaming performance honestly probably beats the 7950X3D in reality because you don't have to do core marking. And one of the major things that's coming out in the reviews is that this thing is super efficient. It is just, it's mind-boggling how much power you're getting for the actual amount of juice it's sucking from the wall. And it's the cheapest way, at least according to Ars Technica, to get the most out of a $1,500 GPU. It really is just the gaming chip to buy if you go watch all of the reviews. But one of the things I want to point out in Ars Technica's review is the 7800X3D sucks 66 watts of power in Borderlands 3 at 1080p, which is less than the 5800X3D by about 14 watts, and it got better performance, and that 66 watts puts it at roughly the Ryzen 7700 at max TDP. This is an efficient chip level power consumption for maximum gaming level performance. It's beating out the 13900K in a lot of games, it's beating out the 7950X3D in a lot of games, and it's coming in at a price point of $450. It really does look like this is shaking up the industry. AMD has released yet another chip that likely will just live in your system for years to come. I'm actually really excited that it's coming out so early in the AM5 generation. A lot of people had to wait until the 5800X3D came out for AMD to be on top when it came to the gaming chip with AM4, but now we're starting off early. People can pick up the 7800X3D and have that last for years. It's a good move. I like to see it, and I'm gonna like to see it even more in person, which is all thanks to today's video sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Micro Center. This is the top store for me to get any of my computer goods, and they're actually going to be opening their first new store in 8 years in Indianapolis later this year. They currently have 25 locations nationwide. Indianapolis coming this summer, and then they're also going to have 2 more by 2025. And then by signing up and visiting the Indianapolis store, you can get a 128 gig flash drive for free. But Micro Center also has other great deals, like their month-long sale on Apple products. For the entire month of April, you can check out Micro Center's prices on Apple laptops and different customizations that you can't get in other stores. You can get deals like $200 off MSRP on the MacBook Pro 16-inch all month long. But also with the launch of the 7800X3D, if it's your first time being a customer at a Micro Center, you can get $25 off any Intel or AMD CPU, limit one per customer, in-store only, but that coupon does apply to the brand new CPU that's launching today. But Micro Center does have it all if you're a tech enthusiast. A 3D printing and maker section, a build your own department, in case you want to spec out your own PC and potentially even have their associates build it for you for a small fee. Using their online PC builder, you'll know that your parts are compatible and you can get same-day pro assembly. But I always love working with Micro Center, going to Micro Center, because they have incredible prices on tons of different products, including the Apple products, but also PC product sales as well. They have a knowledgeable staff. Again, 25 stores in the US, more coming soon, Indianapolis this summer. They have a huge variety, 30,000 items in stock, and you can check them out at the link in the video description. Whether it's for the first-time customer CPU coupon or the Apple sales that they have, or just to window browse, check out Micro Center at the link in the video description. Big thanks again to them for sponsoring today's video. So come join us on the stream for Micro Center. We'd love to have you there, but it turns out that love was not had between Google and the head of Stadia, because the head of Stadia is gone. Phil Harrison, the person who promoted Stadia, who said it was the future of games, left the company allegedly in January, according to reports. Now just updated his LinkedIn, no idea where he's going to go, but he was the vice president of Google, got assigned to this department, it got canned, didn't actually perform well, and it's kind of sad to see that this happened, because I did legitimately like Stadia to some extent. I wish it could have been better, and that's what a lot of people wanted out of Intel's 11th gen CPUs, at least in the mobile sector. Tiger Lake getting discontinued as well. In January 2024, these lists of CPUs are no longer going to be sold, and you'll just have to deal with that. You'll have to live on 12th and 13th gen. Sorry, but you know what we're not going to discontinue? UFD deals, because Reese has the hottest tech deals for you right now.
Yo, welcome back to UFD Deals, bringing the hottest tech deals out on the internet. It's a special nighttime version of this. We don't do this often. I'm traveling really early tomorrow morning, but I couldn't leave you guys hanging because our friends and channel sponsors Micro Center have some deals for you. Starting with this 32 gig kit of G-Skill Ripjaw 5 DDR4 RAM, running at 3200 megahertz at CL16, going for only $74.99, which is $130 $27 off. And then next we have this 43-inch Samsung 4K Smart TV, which you can pick up for only $249.99, which is $150 off. Honestly, be cool, rock this on your desk, and I can live vicariously through you because I can't do that small desk game. But then something that's a little bit more my size is this 11-inch Apple iPad Pro. This 2021 edition features the M1 chip and 512 gigs of storage, which you can pick up for only $869.99, which is $180 off, thanks to their Apple Savings event. But be sure to check out Micro Center's website for more deals. Until next time, I'm gonna hand you back to Brad for the rest of your hot news. Cheers.
Thanks, Reese. But what looks to be the biggest deal of them all is that Ram is coming out with their electric truck sometime soon, and they're releasing more details. And it turns out it's going to have the highest range out of any electric truck announced thus far, with a 229 kilowatt-hour battery being the top one, and it's going to be over 500 miles of range. The 168 kilowatt-hour standard version is going to get 350 miles of range, which is also incredible. It looks like Ram is taking this EV transition seriously, on top of the fact that they're going to have a whole lot of truck features to be in the 1500 rev, 2,700 pounds of payload capacity, 14,000 pounds towing capacity, and it's also going to have up to 350 kilowatt DC fast charging, and it's going to offer bi-directional charging for up to 7.2 kilowatts of power delivery, which is rivaling what you can get with the F-150 Lightning. It does look like the 1500 rev. It's going to be good. I want to see this in person. I want to see more of this truck. It really is cool to see a brand that is known for like American muscle and America's love of coal and oil is being transitioned to EVs. I can't wait to get more of it. I'm really surprised at how much the specs are lining up with what I want to see out of them. And the specs on the RTX 4070 are lining up with benchmarks that are finally coming out. It turns out in an OpenCL benchmark that we're getting out now, it's about where you would expect it to come in. It's roughly 20% slower than the RTX 4070 Ti, which was originally supposed to be a 4080, mind you. And that puts it in the realm of being an RTX 3080 in generalized performance. Now, likely in gaming performance, it's probably going to go toe-to-toe with the RTX 3080, except in places where memory bandwidth is going to be important, because the RTX 4070 is going to have less memory bandwidth than the RTX 3080, but it does have more VRAM than the RTX 3070 Ti, so it could potentially do better than that. Additionally, because of this benchmark, we have more details on the actual specs that are going to be in the 4070. It looks like it's going to have the exact same amount of CUDA cores, so no increase there. It's just going to be IPC improvements and power efficiency improvements and all of the things that NVIDIA's tweaked to be in the RTX 40 series. And then on top of that, we are expecting it to only have a TGP of 200 watts, which is 20 watts less than the 3070, 90 watts less than the 3070 Ti, and it looks like you're getting 3080 level performance for much lower power consumption, which is something we were praising AMD for with the 7800X3D. If the 4070 is delivering that here, $599 is a tough pill to swallow, but it does look like it's at least a marginal improvement all around. Let me know, do these numbers help to incentivize you to want to pick up the 4070 allegedly next week, at least according to the reports from Video Cards? Let us know down below in the comments. But what's not alleged, what's not a report, is the official numbers coming out from NVIDIA themselves on the update that's coming to Cyberpunk 2077. In case you haven't been paying attention, RT Overdrive is the next wave of ray tracing that NVIDIA is trying to put into video games. So this is actual path tracing. This is like the legit direct global illumination. Everything is 100% ray traced, unlimited ray tracing shadows. NVIDIA showing it off in this video, but one of the things that they also show off in this video is just the fact that this $1,600 graphics card will not be enough for anything that you're trying to do, with them showing